very much, Yasmina, and good morning, everybody. My name's Ed Dumbill. I work for O'Reilly Media, and I'm the program chair for our Strata series of conferences. My co-chair, Alistair Kroll, has been the person who's curated much of today's presentation, and I'd like to thank him in advance for his work. Unfortunately, he's on an aeroplane, so I get to take all the glory and enjoy all the speakers this morning. But thanks to him, and I'm sure he'll be watching the recording with much interest. Before getting into the program, I'd just like to let you know about the Strata conferences that are coming up. We're going to be in London on October the 1st and 2nd. We're also going to be in New York on October the 23rd through 25th. More details of those conferences are available at strataconf.com. Now, to me, data and elections and politics have always been very closely linked. I had what I think was the privilege of growing up with a mother who ran election campaigns. And so, to me, the two subjects have always been side by side. As a computer geek, I remember that really some of my first exposure to kind of grown-up computing was actually the election system that my mother had in place, which seemed quite far ahead of many other businesses at the time. So the need for data to drive campaigns and to drive elections has always meant that politics has taken a keen interest, from polling. And in fact, the whole notion of elections and counting votes has meant that data and statistics have been intertwined from really since the start of elections. Another part of my life where I've been privileged to work with politics and data has been in my early career at the Press Association in the UK, where I had the privilege in '97 of pretty much running the tech to bring the election coverage online. Now, things have come on a long way in 15 years, and we're going to hear, especially from people at The Guardian, about data-driven campaigning and how elections are covered online. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about the schedule today and very grateful to have such an amazing panel of speakers joining us. Our first presentation this morning is going to be hosted by Alex Howard, who is the government correspondent, the Washington correspondent for O'Reilly Radar, and it's been my privilege to work with him for quite a while, and Amanda Michel from The Guardian in the US, and she's the open editor. I'm going to turn this over to Alex now, who's going to lead off the session about how big data will play a role in President Obama's re-election campaign.
Well, thank you so much for convening the conference, Ed, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in online. It's an exciting moment for people who are following this space. I think it may be a bit disarming for some people, too, when they look at the scale of what's happening in this space. And I'm particularly excited that we were able to land Amanda to discuss this because she and her colleague, Ed Pilkington, who is correspondent for The Guardian USA, have done some excellent reporting in this area. Unfortunately, Ed was called away, so it'll be just Amanda and I. But that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world because you get to hear more from her. She has, I think, what could be fairly called a unique perspective in this area because of her background where she started working on campaigns, including the Dean campaign, and then working on Kerry's internet team. So it's two different presidential experiences. And then has moved over to journalism, and including some excellent work at the Huffington Post and ProPublica before she joined The Guardian. So with that introduction, I want to dig right into this as we have a fairly short amount of time with Amanda to discuss this. So, Amanda, are you here and tuned in?
I am here.
Fantastic. So I think the big question I want to get right to is what's different about this election with respect to how the presidential campaigns are gathering, synthesizing, and applying data versus 2008 or 2004? What's the change this year?
So, I mean, really there's this sort of incremental change, which is about the volume and speed of data. But I think the sort of transformative changes are two. One is, the campaigns are thoroughly interested in what's called the social graph. So, in 2008, campaigns would rely on supporters. They'd ask them to disseminate information on Facebook and on Twitter to, invoke the support of other like-minded friends. But this time, the campaigns are trying to plug into people's social graphs to identify who their friends are, and then to be able to use that data to do sophisticated online targeting, and essentially to be able to prioritize their voters. And the second sort of transformative change is actually an organizational one. Data is not new. Ed made this point, and certainly you can look back, I think almost especially on the Republican side, to very early uses of data for targeting. But what's new is the effort being made within campaigns to take all the data that they have, whether it's about how people are organizing online, so what is it they like, they share, how they're using, for example, a volunteer call center to make calls to other supporters, to invite other people to join a campaign, taking the information too about who's walking into local field offices, plus everything from online advertising, and just sort of like pack it all together so that they can have a sort of holistic view of the electorate and their supporters as a whole. And that's the more sort of transformative shift. It's the effort to sort of unify and make sense of the data across the entire operation, and to give staff inside the campaigns access to that data so that they can make, from the campaign's perspective, better decisions about their work.
Okay, so if I hear two things. One, it's the use of the social graph, which is a term that may be familiar to people from Facebook land, something they've been constructing over there. And then the use of data for targeting and the aggregation and unification to enable frontline campaign workers to work better. Is that about right?
Yeah, the truth is campaigns, they've long been dependent on data. They've always been in a position of counting votes and figuring out who are likely supporters, who are probable voters. But what we're talking about is a difference in degree. There's far more data, and the data is oftentimes accessible in real time. And then there's the interest campaigns have in social data, so using what information they can mine from Facebook and Twitter to understand who people are personally connected to, so that they can think about how to get out the vote, not just in terms of who's a likely voter, but who may be able to influence whom. That's certainly a change, I think, a more profound change from 2008. And lastly, the campaigns are they're trying to figure out how to get their staff access to all this data. What's the point of having it if people can't make use of it? So those are, I think, the three big shifts from 2008.
So without putting too fine a point on it, you said the campaigns are trying to figure out how to get their staff's access. Now, you and Ed have done a couple great pieces earlier this year focusing upon the Obama campaign's efforts. What about the Romney campaign? You just published a piece recently about their efforts, and I believe said that they're starting to close some of the gap, certainly around engagement online. What do we know about their digital operation and how successful they've been?
So, the Romney campaign has done several things. So Zach Moffett, who runs the Romney internet team, is the founder of Targeted Victory, which is a GP consultancy that focuses on micro-targeting. And I recently heard him speak at Personal Democracy Forum here in New York. It's a conference that brings together lots of organizers and folks in the tech space. And he talks a lot about persuasion, and in part his great focus on using online advertising to try and persuade both the supporters of Romney to turn out, but also to persuade more people to consider Romney. Sasha Issenberg, a reporter at Slate, has had a really interesting piece actually in January, in which he essentially argued that the Romney campaign was able to carry so much weight in Iowa because so early on it had used data to sort of micro-target likely Romney voters. So that's one example in the way in which the Romney campaign has operated. But Moffett will also point to some interesting stats. And one of the stats that we included in our piece was that while the Obama Facebook page has many more followers than Romney, so 27 million compared to fewer than 2 million for Romney, the truth is that posts on the Romney Facebook page get almost as many likes and shares. And so Moffett essentially argues that while they have ground to make up when it comes to the number of followers, they're actually getting almost an equal amount of engagement. Some of these stats are really difficult to make sense of, and I think the real challenge, for those of us who are reporting on this is that we don't have access to the same data. And sometimes the data points that we do have access to, they're bits and pieces here and there. And you can't always sort of make an analytical leap from, because they have so many Twitter followers, therefore they will win the election. That doesn't make sense. The Obama campaign has pushed back against Romney's campaign, saying, well, you might get just as many likes and shares, but far more people talk about Obama on Facebook and Twitter. The truth is there are certain metrics that are not accessible. There are certain data points, like it's hard to know, for example, how many events both campaigns are really hosting and the number of people who are turning out. We do not know, for example, what was the turnout from the primaries on the left. We don't know how many people came out for Obama in different states. We do know the campaign used as a trial. So while the data is essential for the campaigns, for a lot of reporters, we just don't have access to the same data points. So it's tricky to make sense of.
This is actually a good question to lead you towards here, that we're going to hear a lot more from people who are professional consultants, who are creating technologies, who are deeply enmeshed in this world. You're coming at this from the journalism side, and as I mentioned initially, you have some significant background in the campaign side too. What are some of the ways that the journalism world, so-called data journalism world, is responding and trying to figure out how to use some of these new tools to track what the campaigns are doing? You were involved in something that people may know about. It's called Off the Bus, which looked at helping the crowd do better reporting. What efforts are there being used to apply big data to campaign reporting, particularly when obviously the sophistication of these operations is significant now?
I think there are lots of ways in which we're trying to chip away, and I would say that, my hope is, both that we make substantive progress this election, but I think it'll probably take another cycle for us to really wise up to the campaign ways. So there are a few things you can do. Actually, several months ago, we scraped Obama's online database of events. So if you go to the Obama campaign website, you can plug in a zip code, and you could then get access to all the events that are happening in that area. We were able to scrape the entire database and then analyze the events across different states. We could also see, for example, if the same person was hosting 10 or 20 events. And that was relatively useful to us because we could take those numbers and reports from 2008 and compare and sort of contrast to see, is there more momentum this time? What is the volume of activity? We can also take figures like the number of Facebook and Twitter followers. I think increasingly, though, reporters are going to get savvier and think about ways, for example, to use data from companies like Bitly to see, how people, like for example, the number of people who are actively visiting a campaign website. This is a real challenge. There's some really interesting efforts, like ProPublica, which is a nonprofit investigative newsroom where I used to work, has something called the message machine. And what they're essentially doing is asking their readers to forward them emails that they're getting from the campaign, from the Obama campaign. And what they're doing is they're comparing and contrasting the different versions that their readers are getting. They know where their readers are, like what their zip code is, and they're able to show people to some degree how the campaign is targeting its messages based on people's geography. I see that as the start of something. I think most of the reporting efforts to make sense of the campaigns using data, like we're trying to open up windows here and there, but I don't think that there's a massive effort that's given people the holistic view of the campaigns. They're fairly buttoned up.
Well, and I've spoken to people like Derek Willis in the New York Times. He's suggested to me that the skills and capabilities that the journalism world needs to keep up with these data-driven campaigns aren't as well distributed or developed as they need to be yet. So it's great to hear that there are definitely some efforts underway. You spoke a bit there about some brass tacks in terms of what some of this technology does, and for people who are familiar with the modern media world online, they've heard of A/B testing. We'll show one audience this and show another audience that, and see what they click on more or more interested in. That's something that Google has refined quite a bit for advertising, and it certainly looks like the campaigns are working on that too. You gave a specific example on email marketing where they might show different messages to different people depending upon the data they have about them. Can you tell us more about what we know about what the campaign's data technology does and how well it does it?
So the example that you gave reminds me of Optimizely. Optimizely is a company that's run by Dan Soroker, who actually was on the Obama campaign in 2008. He moved over from Google after he was inspired by a talk that Obama gave at the company. And Soroker's real task within the campaign was to make sure that everything from a landing page, so let's say you see a URL to the Obama website in a tweet, and you click through. The page that you land on may actually be designed for someone coming from a tweet, or perhaps it's designed for someone who read a specific email. And his job was literally to figure out the composition of pages and features that would push as many people to take a specific action as possible. And he actually got started fairly late in the campaign, but some of the claims are quite spectacular that the A/B testing that he did, so comparing 2 versions or 3 versions, for example, of a single page or feature, essentially raised upwards of like $50 million for the Obama campaign. If you put that in the big, big picture, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's the kind of money that can float a state through a state or 2 states through the general election. So, there are a few things that the campaigns are doing, ways they're using data. One is they're focusing on optimizing. If you have millions of supporters, small tweaks around the periphery can lead to huge advantages, much like Soroker's company, I think, is doing now for many campaigns. You also will invest money in online advertising. I spoke a bit before about Zach Moffett on the Romney campaign, who talks a lot about how online advertising helps him much more quickly respond to attacks on the candidate. He also thinks it helps tap into a percentage of the electorate that frankly doesn't focus on advertising on TV. He'll point to stats like 1/3 of the electorate isn't going to really watch TV. They're not going to be influenced by the ads that are running on TV. And so he uses online advertising to get to them. Data is also used to figure out, frankly, how to mobilize a volunteer force. Where do you have the most volunteers? Perhaps if you have a lot of volunteers in a state that isn't particularly competitive, you might organize them, for example, to make phone calls to a state that needs higher turnout. So a lot of these numbers are frankly very useful in figuring out how to make the best use of resources. But in this election, they're also really helping campaigns sort of tether the electorate online. So showing them ads, showing ads to who they think are probable voters. They're essentially making them a lot smarter at what they do.
So we're running a little bit late. I knew this would happen, that we'd zip through our time. I think I'm going to zip in here with a question from Sean Dakin, and he's one of the organizers of Privacy Camp. There are a lot of questions that are being raised, I think fairly, about the level of targeting that's going on, and particularly around the use of email and phone lists to find people. And I think there's going to be some certainly very interesting crossovers in terms of mobile technology, where people will be targeted, hopefully not at the polls, since that might create some legal issues, but certainly as this heats up, the use of text messaging, email, et cetera, that's specifically targeted in independent states could be quite significant. And given that the FEC is allowing donations via mobile text message, there are, I think, new landscapes that are about to open up. What do we know right now in terms of how personalized these messages are becoming, and how much they know about us, so to speak? I mean, do voters have any right to privacy in this context, in a broad sense?
So this is also another area in which I'm actually hoping that Patrick Ruffini, who's coming on soon, can tell us a lot more about the data than I myself know. I know lots of voters who I've talked to are very worried. They sort of envision it like in 1984, a sort of 10th circle of Dante's Inferno, that they're just sort of going to be trapped by either the information that campaigns know about them, or that they're somehow going to be robbed of their free will. A lot of the data that's gathered is either data that's publicly available. Some of it's also commercial data, so behaviors and actions that people have taken online. It's also behavior and activities people have undertaken on the campaign website and other ways that the campaigns can track. To some extent, people on the campaigns will point out that the data is anonymized because they're looking for those who are probable voters. So less that they care about that specific individual, but more that they're trying to shift groups of people closer to the candidate and to voting. I think, I think Daniel Kreis, who's looked very closely into this, raises a few concerns that I think strike at the question you asked about privacy and perhaps some other even more important questions. So one is we don't actually know how secure the data is. We don't know how the campaigns are managing it. Clearly they're using data that they get from consulting groups. Sometimes they contract consulting groups to use the data. It's really unclear what that state is. And I think for someone who's concerned about privacy, a possible data breach is perhaps a much more likely and sort of scary situation. And I would love to know more about that from the campaign. But I think there are a few other concerns as well about this sort of shift. And one is what Kreis calls redlining the electorate, which is that this is another way in which you can decide that part of the electorate is more valuable or more likely to be valuable. And sort of an analog offline is redistricting, the idea that you look for those whom you would like to represent. And I think there are questions about who may or may not be left behind by these tactics too. There's the cost, which Kreis also points out that more sophisticated campaigns need more sophisticated staff and more sophisticated technology. This might leave folks out. And lastly, I'm personally interested in how this might change our relationship with politicians over time, or a changing relationship with power. When politicians can quantify the likelihood that you will vote, who you will vote for, and what reasons, you may ultimately have less political power. It's as if the politician has far more information about you than you may have about them. And I think in a society in which we depend very much on representation, this is an area in which I'm particularly interested to hear more political scientists and others weigh in on what this actually means for governance and the sort of relationship, accountable relationship between politicians and people.
Well, that's I think an excellent place to close this part of the discussion. We've run right up into 9:25 as expected. For people who are interested, I have posted background reading on big data and elections over at the Riley Radar Tumblr. I've also put it onto Google Plus and Facebook for people who've circled or subscribed to me there. And it includes the pieces that you and Ed have written over the past year. And I hope that the discussions will continue around these areas. I think you've raised some key issues. From what I can tell in the reporting I've seen around this, the Obama campaign is holding a lot of the data internally, has built quite a large database, has built something called Dashboard to give their frontline workers a lot of access to it and enable them to do data collection. And from what we know, the Romney campaign has outsourced some of its data work to a firm. So we don't know exactly as much about that as we might. It hasn't been forthcoming for some number of reasons. So Amanda, thank you so much for spending the time this morning. And if you're not already following her work at The Guardian, I highly suggest you do so. You can find her at Twitter at AMICHEL. And certainly she's going to be continuing to offer us some key perspective on the use of technology in these elections. So thanks again for joining us. And hopefully we've got Patrick Ruffini in the line to move on over. Right, Ed?
Thanks much, Alex.
Absolutely. Alex, take it away with Patrick.
Patrick, are you there for us?
Yes. Hi, Alex. How are you?
How are you doing today?
Very good.
So I gather you're just out in Chicago talking about something very similar to this discussion today. Were you able to hear what we were talking about with Amanda there?
Absolutely. I mean, I thought it was a very helpful and accurate summary, and in many ways, I mean, you hear We've certainly observed many of the same things about sort of this engagement gap that, Obama has a lot of fans, a lot of followers, largely driven by, I would argue, the celebrity factor that comes along with being president of the United States. And the question is, at the end of the day, for all the campaigns, is how do you translate those fans and those followers into boots on the ground for a campaign, into votes, into things that matter from a campaign perspective, whether that's donating and all of those activities. Ultimately, the three things that matter, from a campaign perspective are, money, message, and boots on the ground, mobilization, things that you would see, from a robust grassroots effort, knocking on doors and the like.
So to riff off of that, where is data playing a role in the three things that matter to campaigns right now? How did it matter or factor into the presidential primary we just saw go by? I mean, that talk about a petri dish of strategies and technologies being used.
Yeah, so I thought in many ways Romney was the only one who was even remotely playing this game, and it makes sense. And you can also back this out to an analysis of where the candidates are in the general election. Romney is the only candidate who had a real infrastructure during the primaries to be able to do, I think, any kind of, even the most rudimentary and basic forms of data targeting whatsoever. And what I mean by that is, there was at one point in the campaign, very late in the campaign, where Rick Santorum, Romney's chief challenger for the nomination, did not have a campaign headquarters. And this wasn't early in the campaign either. This was after he'd won Iowa. So it just kind of goes to show you that, you had all of these guys kind of popping up right and left, up and down, with as sort of, who's going to be ahead in the national polls this week. It was a very chaotic environment that was driven largely by message, right? It was driven by just who was hot that week in the media, who was seen as the chief conservative rival to Romney. Romney, as being sort of recognized as the front runner, had money, had organization, had veterans of the RNC, veterans of the previous Bush campaigns, that was able to put at least somewhat of a data operation in place. Amanda cited the example of Iowa, where essentially they had, I think, the best thing you could have in any kind of a situation like this, where they had run before. So they had done an extensive turnout and ID effort in 2008 to determine who all of their caucus goers are. If you look at the Iowa caucuses in particular, that is an environment where it's, like you said, a petri dish, but in the most extreme way, because you actually know who all of your voters are. And in many cases, you've made, in some cases, in these campaigns, these are campaigns that usually fail, you have identified every single one of your voters by name, and you have them on a card, and there's an index score of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you want to turn out your ones and twos. So Romney had that from 2008 in Iowa. He was, as such, able to mobilize just enough votes to, some people might call it a 7-vote Romney victory. Other people might call it a 30-vote defeat. But nonetheless, he was able to, generate a lot of momentum out of that showing. A similar state where this happened was Michigan, where Romney was down by close to double digits about a week before the Michigan primary. The Romney team believes that it was their ability to target, based on all the supporters that they knew that they had from running in the Michigan primary 4 years earlier, that they were able to turn it around there. And that would have been, had he lost that would have been a crippling defeat, because that was his home state. That was, where he was supposed to do well, and did well largely on the back of, what I would argue is a very a robust data targeting operation than he was able to pull off in that instance. Largely, other than that, though, I would say that presidential primaries are much more volatile, and there was little opportunity for the other candidates to use this because they were so underfunded, and it was just a game of how can we get the most media attention, how can we get the most social media traction here. And I feel like these tools are generally used by the candidates who are more established, who have a bigger brand, who need to optimize that brand.
So there's, I think, from what I can see in the political side of my feeds and contacts, a lot of interest in continuing to use the tools that people felt were important from 2008, 2010, which is to say the classic list building, email websites, using mobile a lot more now in terms of text messaging. And that's, I think, I don't want to say fascination, but certainly not so far away from it with social media. What should people be expecting in terms of how this election will be different in terms of the campaign's use of big data to target messaging based upon people's use of these platforms? Certainly the context for Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the impact of people browsing political news online is quite different in 2012 than it was for the last presidential election.
We have talked about, for years, right, we've talked about social media as this watershed development in terms of engagement, and that politicians can be more directly connected to the people that they represent. I would argue that in some cases that promise has been realized, but in many cases the more relevant development for campaigns and for particularly message-disciplined operations that may have been less comfortable with the sort of open engagement that's made possible through social media. But one of the most interesting and relevant developments has been basically the ability for anybody to have public metrics on exactly how the candidates are doing. And once those metrics, the like counts, the YouTube view counts, the retweet counts, are all basically publicly exposed, and everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows how the candidates are doing on these various channels. There's just a real sense that you have to optimize those numbers or else you perish. And so, and gone are sort of these milquetoast, boring 30-second TV ads that, would generally not garner much public attention. Now there's a real sense that you have to generate content that's going to get shared. And I think that's a real shift, not necessarily on the quote-unquote big data side, but people are definitely optimizing around increasing their number of likes. And they're using it, frankly, for message testing. So you talk to a lot of people, and they will, Facebook page administrators, and beyond just sort of the benefits that you get from engagement, they're looking to what's getting the most likes and what's getting the most retweets to essentially optimize their message so that it resonates, so that the media picks it up, so that it's further amplified in other channels. And that's a big shift because as recently as 2004, we didn't know really what was working for the other campaign. Now, the big shift in 2008 and 2012 is we know exactly what's working in real time across the spectrum, and that's not really privileged information for the campaign. That's known everywhere, and that's created a real shift in messaging, I think.
So you mentioned that campaigns know what the other campaigns know what's working, or city can see it. I think you've been pretty active in terms of critiquing often in real time the messaging you're seeing coming from the campaigns, and you use different accounts to assess that yourself. I follow you on Instagram, so I see you sharing headers coming in from the different campaigns. To what extent are these decisions data-driven now versus, say, the gut of a campaign manager? I mean, both the campaign tech team on the Obama side is pretty certainly interested in data, and the candidate on the Republican side is famously data-driven from his business experience. How much of this is playing a role, and what are the key metrics that you're seeing the campaigns care about in terms of the technology?
So it's interesting because I think there's much less room. It seems like there's much less room for, let's say, the creative auteur in a way in some of these campaigns. Whereas before, I feel like, if you went back to previous campaigns, people would always idolize the media strategists. They'd always idolize these mysterious figures who are kind of pulling the strings from behind the scenes, who are, devising these brilliant strategies. And I feel like a lot of that mystique has been stripped away by this very hard-nosed, very in many ways formulaic focus on data. This is one thing I noticed back in the 08 campaign too, as how it's sort of truism in campaigns that you want to have a message of the day. You want to change up what you're saying, and you want to stay relevant to the media discussion. But it's also true that if you find something that's working, you stick with it, and you bang it into people's heads however you can. So at one point in the 08 campaign, I started to notice that Obama, for all their digital prowess and for all their at that point 90 people that they had on their digital staff, and I understand that that's been tripled now. But for all that, they didn't change their homepage feature slider graphic for 3 weeks, and I kind of, that seems they're letting the website get stale. And it was because of the fact that it was a promotion that was working to generate revenue and dollars for the campaign. So you'll see, I feel like the Obama campaign has been very aggressive in using email, and email is still king in a lot of ways for fundraising, to just optimize around the one or two promotions that they know will work. So practically every email, I don't know if anyone has done a statistical analysis, has been about dinner with Barack. You see the Romney campaign has also, in some senses, gone with this motif, grab a bite with Mitt, go and get dinner with the candidate. We can be sure that now that the 17th time they've done this, that's not because it's just a fun thing to do, or it's something that it's a hunch. It's actually because that has been shown on an A/B test to be by far the most effective fundraising appeal. And so even if it, for us insiders, it gets really stale, it seems to work, or else they wouldn't be repeating the same thing over and over again.
So let's see. I think we've got questions coming in here. I think got one for Patrick from, looks like Sean Dakin, active man. What do you think about the fact that in 2012 he's saying only 1.5% of the spend is online? Is that match up with stats?
Yeah, there's talk about it. They sort of talk. Some people say it's 3%. Some people say it's. But it depends on how you kind of cut the size of the numbers. But I would argue that in many ways, this focus on data targeting, right, in many ways is sort of, at least from a question of resources, because you can optimize so much online. In many ways, it's not inspiring people to spend more. It's inspiring people to spend less, to conserve resources, to optimize every single dollar. And if you are, run an online ad business, in many ways, it feels like that what you're able to do, the power of television and campaigns has always been the ability to reach every single voter in a single shot. Or at least a large majority of the voters, that you repeat this tactic and you will have guaranteed that you will have saturated the electorate in some sense. We don't see that mentality online. And it would be one thing if the campaigns were as a whole shifting towards completely data targeting and data-driven advertising, and they would be able to spend a lot less. But what we're actually seeing is the availability of resources is much greater than it has been in the past, and those excess dollars are still going to more traditional forms of media, because there's probably some sense that we can't spend it all online, even though more voters are in fact, cord cutting. They are time shifting. They aren't watching TV ads. There's still some sense that you can be very efficient online, but that's not necessarily the same as more money going online.
So last question, because we're running a little bit late, but I want to be sure I ask it, since you're one of the smartest analysts I know in this space. Is big data going to be a strategic differentiator in this election? Is the slicing and dicing of the electorate by state, county interest by the Obama campaign going to be enough to make up for the enthusiasm gap that we can safely assume will be a difference from the 2008 election?
I think there's a certain sense, and we saw it with the engagement numbers, that both sides are pretty evenly matched in terms of their sophistication in using a lot of these tools. You can argue that Obama had a real head start with his 2008 infrastructure, his 13 million person email list, and just the large staff that they were able to build up during the primaries that Romney wasn't. I will say that a lot of the data efforts, I would look on the Republican side particularly, I wouldn't necessarily pin the Romney campaign as the ones who are going to be the most, let's say, elaborate in some of these efforts, because there are a lot of super PACs and there are a lot of groups that can spend unlimited amounts of money acquiring data, analyzing data, conducting experiments on the electorate. And I do believe that with that environment where both sides are evenly matched and relatively well funded, that it's going to be, and in a close election, these types of things that typically don't capture wide interest and attention among the electorate will matter and have been shown to matter in 2 or 3 point races. And so to the extent that we can figure out a better mousetrap around voter contact, around what's the most efficient way to spend the resources that we've got, I feel like it very well could be. But there's not a sense, I don't believe that there's a sense that one side is so thoroughly dominant that you'd want to put a finger on the scale on either side right now with it.
A careful answer, as always. Patrick, thank you very much for your time this morning. If you're not following Patrick Ruffini on the various social platforms he contributes to, or reading his blog at Engage DC, I recommend it for the frontline insight he's offering for the data-driven election. Patrick, thank you so much for your time. And Ed, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to Mr. Simon Rogers and look at the use of data across the pond over in England.
Thanks very much, Alex. If you've just joined us, you're very welcome. You're listening to the Strata event on data and elections, getting the data vote out. We're following online at the hashtag StrataConf, and obviously in the group chat if you're on the webcast. You're very welcome to join us this morning. And thanks so much to Alex Howard, who is O'Reilly's Washington correspondent, for conducting the previous 2 interviews. Now, we've heard a lot about how politicians and campaigns are using the power of data to really optimize what they're doing and bring a sharper focus and really do things like speed up the iteration of their message. But what about the power of data in the hands of the voters themselves? I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker, who is Simon Rogers. He's the data editor of The Guardian in the UK and really been at the forefront of a lot of recent data-driven journalism. So I'm going to hand it over to him now to talk about voters getting the power of data in recent elections. Simon.
Hi, guys, and hello from London. This is from the newsroom of The Guardian, so it may be a little bit noisy in the background. So what I'm going to do is, I guess, less big data and more about the data that's kind of the raw stuff of elections, which traditionally has belonged to kind of an establishment, and now increasingly in some of the elections we've seen this year has been opened up to the world and hackers to do kind of interesting things with. So we're just going to launch a screen share. Can everybody see my screen? Are we getting a...
We can see it.
The way the system, we can see it. Brilliant. That's good news. Okay, so obviously this has been an amazing year for elections beyond Washington, out there in the rest of the world. The power of the vote kind of changing with the way the world works. You've had people in Paris, in Egypt, and in Greece very recently, twice recently, and in London. That is a picture from the London mayoral election. Hope you can see that. That's a picture from the London mayoral election, and the reason they all look so annoyed is because the results were held up by one bit of London where the votes have been locked in a cupboard by mistake. And for all of these elections, what's increasingly started to happen is that the data has been opened up to the world. And it's kind of that data has been democratized. I'm going to try and show you now some videos. My screen share keeps slipping off, so you guys let me know if the screen goes blank for a minute then. So this is something that Ed won't necessarily remember, but may well recognize the style of it from his youth. This is a British election from 1966, and a guy called Bob Mackenzie, who, if you grew up in Britain, was part of our kind of election furniture. He was the man who told us what was happening each election. That was a famous swingometer, which was used in 1955. It was basically repealed in every single UK election since. Now, stuff's moved on a bit since then in the way that this stuff is presented. This is the last election in the UK. It's the version of the swingometer now. But what's stayed the same with all these years is that the data has belonged to the establishment. It's belonged to the BBC or CNN or whoever will pay the cash for it. And that's the big change what's starting to happen now. So this is what we get, for instance. This is from the Press Association. This shows kind of election results as they come in, and it's live data, which is really, really useful. But it's very much... So, guys, can you confirm you can still see my screen share? I've got a... it kind of comes off and on for me. So we can people...
We can still see it.
Great. Thanks, Yasmina. I'm getting a red there now. Can you still see it now?
We can.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to assume you can. If it changes, then let me know. So this is what we get from the Press Association, which is kind of UK version of it's like AP or Reuters. And this is raw live data, election data. It comes in every few seconds during election night, and it tells you who's won what. This is from the recent local elections in the UK, and it tells you the percentage votes, turnouts, swings, this kind of raw stuff of elections. And it costs money, and this is the stuff that we pay. But that power, that kind of live data is starting to shift. We saw it in the States recently. It's the only US reference, I promise, that John Keefe at WNYC discovered that Google Elections was actually getting the results in before AP, which is probably the first time this has happened. Suddenly that kind of power shifts. And the official data we get is still kind of less than useful. So this is a map of the official London results that came in. Red is slightly different to the US. Obviously, red in the UK is Labour, or which is to the left of the political spectrum, and blue is Conservative. And what you get is these huge constituencies that they basically merge together different bits of London. And you get the result. This is a city of 8 million people, and each of those places will cover maybe a few thousand or 100,000 people. So it's meaningless data. It doesn't tell you really how the city voted or what concerns motivated people in one part of the city compared to another part of the city. But they do have this data, which is the stuff behind the scenes. This is ward level, and wards in the UK are these little areas where the data is counted from these little areas. So they know, for instance, I live in a ward called Kilburn in northwest London, and they know exactly how the votes swing in that area. But you don't get that data officially published for a week and a half after the results. And we got that data and we put it on the site using free tools to kind of make it accessible and visible for people. And it tells you interesting things. We had a first and second preference vote in London in the UK last time. So this is first preference votes, and we have second preference votes, which tells you a lot about the way the political system was going. And the big upheaval and shock in that election was how the Liberal Democrats, who are partners in government, were being eschewed across the city in favour of the Green Party, which was the first time that had happened. So, it tells you interesting stuff, but this is data which, previously we haven't been able to get hold of, and certainly, although it comes in live, we still don't get it live. So it's kind of less than useful. But what's interesting, you look at what's beginning to happen elsewhere and around the world. So, for instance, this is Argentina, October 2011, the election hack. An election hack was organized by hackers in Buenos Aires, and it was a fantastic event. They basically based themselves inside the Interior Ministry. They used a political analyst, got involved, a guy called Andy Tower, who's just a bit of a genius, and they set up this site, which brought together official data from the provisional counts as they came in, and they put it together with candidate details and biographical information of each party candidate on the presidential ticket, and they incorporated this socio-economic data from the census. It was a team of 30 hackers, all kind of volunteers. They started there the day before the election and carried on through the next couple of days, really devoted people, but they created something which became the place to get results in Argentina, and it was open data that anybody could access and download, and they used free tools, which I find really interesting as somebody who uses free tools a lot, Google Fusion Tables, Google Maps, and vector graphics libraries, and they built in previous election results so you can immediately compare and see swings and stuff and how things changed. And it became a platform that the official media all across Argentina used during the elections, which is interesting because it's not the establishment, it's somebody independent coming in and opening up the data. And if you switch to Greece, which has just had 2 elections, these are results from the second election which just took place, there you've got a situation where, interestingly, the data has been available for some time, but only if you had the money to pay for it. Since 1981, a private company in Greece has run election data for the Greek government. The results come in from each polling station, so you've got very ultra-local data. They're collated at a central kind of data center, and that transmits it every 10 minutes, but reasonably live. Although that data is open to the public on the Greek Ministry of the Interior website, you can only get the CSV version if you pay for it, or your accredited media. So it's open up to a limit. But what was interesting to me was that a small data consultancy called iGraphics.gr, great website, they built this, which kind of ran off that data, and they weren't an official media provider. They've become a really good source of data visualization, data work inside Greece. And obviously with the European crisis at the moment, that information becomes really key, really interesting, and really important. And if it's open and available, then suddenly it's something that we can all use. I'm going to switch next to France, because France, to me, is the most interesting of all. It's a huge change. A hackers group called Regard Citoyen, who ran hackathons through both rounds of the presidential elections and the recent legislative vote. And if you wanted live election data from France, this was the place to go. For the first time, the French government this year gave access to a previously restricted XML feed of the live data. So the team could publish live results and analysis as the results came in. And that's really interesting for us because they were allowed into the press room of the French Ministry of the Interior. And what that meant is there was a lot of data that Ministry of the Interior had on paper. It's kind of important stuff. So, for instance, things like participation rates at different times of the day. As they say by midday, how the participation rates in this election compared to the last election in 2007. And they could also show kind of differences in swings and the effect of the National Front vote across the country. And this is because they were right in the centre of government. These are hackers and people who are interested in open data. They're not just Le Monde or whoever the official site that people used to go to for this data. And they digitized the data and they kind of and they were able to compare that election to previous elections. And crucially, certainly for my obsession, is they then made that data, which was published on the Ministry of Interior website in a kind of reasonably inaccessible way. They published that data as CSVs that were formatted in a decent way that you could use. We used it to put some graphics together the next day, and it kind of opens up and democratizes that raw data to the world. And that, to me, is the kind of the crucial thing and the big change we're going to see happening at the moment. Will this happen in Egypt? I haven't seen it yet, and if anybody knows where to get that data out there, I'd love to hear about it, because I think this is kind of where this stuff's going. And of course, there's a lot of big data stories out of these elections, especially when you look at how parties are targeting the campaigns. But I think for a lot of people, this raw data of the way that people vote, the most basic information about elections, actually opening it up and making it available to people is stuff that people will really care about. And it creates loads of interesting things for us. I'm going to end with a few quotes here. This is Mark Twain, and the British Prime Minister called Jim Callaghan used it too. A lie can travel halfway around the world while truth is putting on its shoes. Suddenly in these elections, what we're seeing is, because of the huge amounts of data out there, that anybody can fact check what politicians are saying. We saw it certainly here in the 2010 elections. There are big arguments around crime figures and crime data. But at the same time, the crucial fact is, and I'll give a prize for anybody who knows who this quote came from, people who cast the votes don't decide an election, the people who count the votes do. And suddenly if you open up that data, if you democratize that data, you allow us all to kind of monitor the people who count the votes. That was actually a quote by Stalin, and I'm not sure I can really end this on a quote by Stalin, so I'm going to end with Tim Berners-Lee, which is probably a little more politically acceptable. Raw data now. This is what we want. We want every election to be like this. We want every election to have live data that we can all access and do stuff with. And that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon. I'm just going to ask you one question, not quite letting you get away just yet. So you talked a bit, and we all have this sense that it's better that the data is open and the access is there. And the sense of holding people to account, but particularly with the election data, what are the consequences of this data being available to more people more quickly?
Well, I would love to know what the consequences are of it not being available to more people more quickly, because that seems to be the argument in the past. I think what you have is you have a kind of establishment who historically made quite a lot of money out of selling election data. Certainly, you've got AP and PA who historically have had that data and they've been able to kind of charge most people for it because, they perform a service in collating it. I think increasingly people are realizing why can't we have the data on election night? Recently, what we did was we actually started tweeting the PA stuff as it came through, because why not? And people are really interested in that, those precise turnouts. The kind of information often is quite kind of esoteric, perhaps unless you're obsessed with elections, but the kind of people with interest in data are obsessed with elections. So why not just open up? I think historically maybe there's also been a feeling within government perhaps that it's slightly confusing data, so why let people have it? But now, because of the change in the way that people treat data, I think the change in the people's attitude towards raw information, I think that there can be no kind of justifiable reason for not letting this information come out. We have it here many times where basically constituencies, which are the areas that people vote in, are aggregated and pulled together. So you saw it with the London election, now I showed that example. In the European election, which again is really important, they aggregate that data into huge regions that cover, a quarter of the country. But actually they collect the data at local authority level, which is very, very small and very local. And for people to find out how, the far right did in their area, or even how the mainstream parties did, is always going to be kind of part of the democratic process, I think. And it would also change the way that people like your mother campaigned in elections in the future, I think.
Well, thank you so much for everything, Simon. It's particularly exciting to hear. I think that it will enable people at a local level to really do things and change where they live. Very grateful for you spending time with us. And Raw Data Now, I think, is a great message for us to head on with.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye from London.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening. So you're listening to the Strata Online Conference event on big data and politics and on voting. And our next speaker really is going to take the conversation a little more towards the technical and tool side. I'm very happy to be welcoming Eimar Boesjes from Moonshadow Mobile. And he's really been working developing technology that manages massive amounts of photo data visually in Bing Maps. So without further ado, Eimar, let's hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, thank you. I'm CTO of Moonshadow Mobile, and we develop big data visualization technology. We're based in Eugene, Oregon. And we work together very closely with Labels and Lists. And Labels and Lists is based in Bellevue, Washington, and they're a nationwide provider of voter data. So the way we work together is they assemble the voter data from all the states and in some cases from the counties, and then process it, make sure that it's hooked up to previous data they have, and provide it to us. And what we do is we create visualization technology based on that data to make it accessible. So what you see here is an example of what we do in the background. This is actually, of course, a map of a satellite image of the United States. And what you can see here is for every census block, we actually took census data in this example. For every census block, we've plotted the percentage of Latino people in that census block. And this is a solution that we've created with Labels and Lists where we can generate this type of data instantly. What I'll be doing is I'll give a fairly technical overview, and then I'll quickly move on to how that impacts the situation in this year. So if you look at the entire development spectrum, a lot of things are happening. You look at hardware, there's new tablets coming out. Microsoft announced the other day that they're coming with a challenger to the iPad. If you look at the cloud, there's further price reductions. Browsers, a lot of speed increases are still coming. Languages, standards, HTML5, Node is a language that's being utilized now to speed up applications. Look at databases, non-SQL databases, and I'll go into detail a little bit about each of those. And an SQLite, which is a way to store data on the mobile devices. Mobile connectivity, G4 networks are being built out, and then communication, RESTful APIs, JSON as a means to communicate data. And then, of course, this year in the U.S., redistricting at the data end is a huge problem for everybody, a lot of work. And if you look at the bigger picture, open government is making more and more data available. So let's look at each of these technical aspects that are happening in the market, which are very relevant for us as a developer. So hardware, more and more app phones, really two platforms that are currently taking the market, Android and iPhone, are the dominant platforms. You look at tablets, iPad is taking the market at this point. There are predictions that they're going to have that market for a long time to come. We'll see. What's important for us as developers and as application users is that iPads are less resource-starved than 2 years ago. So they're a lot more useful in what they can do. You can stream a lot more data to it without crashing them. At the cloud end, a lot of services, of course, are hosted in the cloud and are made available through web browsers or mobile devices. And prices are still coming down there, which means that providers like ourselves can provide services at lower costs. So costs are coming down, and some of the services that we provide are actually free. For instance, we have a census viewer application where we make 600 million records from the U.S. government available inside of Bing Maps for free to the entire population, anybody on the web. Another aspect, browsers. Very big developments have been taking place there, and as a result, browsers work faster. JavaScript, a lot of improvements on the functionality, which means that applications can communicate, they can be faster, they don't have to reload entire pages, but just can send bits and pieces around of components of a web page. Language improvements and standards, HTML5 with the ability to store data within the documents, other important aspects, WebGL, and then a language we started using just a couple of months ago, a Node.js, which is an implementation of JavaScript. With Node, we can build more powerful applications than before. One of the things that we can do is we don't have to reload entire pages. We can reload components, which mean that the applications are a lot faster. And then a really exciting technology, which I think very few people are aware of, is server push to browser. Right now, and this is a little technical, right now if you use a web page, you're sending a request to the server, but the server doesn't really have a way to send a message back to you unless you ask for it. Server push to browser means that a server can send you a message, and it can initiate that. So as a result, you can now have client, browser-to-browser communication. So you can create applications where different people using different browsers, whether they're mobile or whether they're online, communicate together, because you can send a message to the server can forward it to another browser user. So lots of developments there. Databases, very big differences that have taken place in the last couple of years. If we look 10 years back, everything was SQL, relational based. Right now, it's a very different landscape. What we have found is that if you optimize databases for specific use and you don't make them SQL, but you make them non-SQL, they can be a lot faster. And so, for instance, we have developed the voter mapping application where we can push 50 million records to a mapping environment per second. Now, that's an enormous amount of data, and as a result, we can create software that is so fast where you can access data visually on maps. You don't have to work with it in a tabular form, which is a lot less tangible. So a lot of changes there. Another aspect in the database world is SQLite, and that's a very important development as well. So what's happening is that the mobile devices can store data on board, which means that the problem that you're having now when you have a mobile canvassing application or a mobile application for any other campaign use, you lose connectivity, you lose access to the data. With SQLite, that doesn't need to be the case anymore. So what you do is as a developer, you store some of the data locally on the device and you communicate between these two databases. Of course, that makes the application development a little bit more complex because you have to synchronize these databases and you have to make sure that if records are accessed by different mobile users at the same time, you synchronize it once everybody is connected again. But it makes it much more powerful because the biggest problem with mobile continues to be connectivity and spectrum overload. So then another development is, of course, the connectivity for mobile devices, G4 networks that are being built out. The biggest hurdle we continue to see is there's just not enough spectrum for data transfer, even in the future. So SQLite, of course, can help with that. Communication between all of these different processes, what we see is more prevalence of what's called RESTful APIs, where people can communicate have their applications communicate with each other in standardized form, which means that in the future, this is starting to happen. It's not happening that much yet, but in the future, different developers of different components or tools that are being used in campaigns can much more easily communicate together. An example of this is the ground game application we've developed, where we have mobile devices that communicate with the same database as an online management interface that a campaign manager is using in his or her office, where they can see what the mobile users are doing, when they're canvassing with their iPhone or their iPad or their Android phone. So another development is data, of course. Data is a huge problem this year because of the redistricting. And what's happening with the redistricting is that the data is changing through the year. It's not all changing at the same moment. every state, every district, local levels, state levels, they're changing their boundary lines and their boundary information at different moments. There are still challenges going on. So as a result, we're getting data pushed to us. Millions of records are changing on a weekly basis, and we have to push them through to all of our customers. So it's a huge challenge for us. Looking at the data sphere long term, open government is continuing to grow, and more data is becoming available. And what's interesting for us as an application developer is we can combine these sources. We can combine massive amounts of data that are coming from very different sources. So this is nice, of course, all of these developments, but what does it mean for 2012? And I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk a little bit about what it means for the next election cycles. So what we can do this year is there's now applications that can visualize very large databases instantly. And what you're looking at here, for instance, is, again, the Latino population of the United States, but now colored per congressional district. And, the reddest congressional districts are, almost 100% Latino. Yellow is non-Latino. So these types of images and this type of data visualization we can now generate within seconds. And that's definitely a new development. Big data is combined in many sources. If you look at this image over here, this is the eastern half of the United States, and this is combining thousands, well, probably millions of satellite images, records from the Census Bureau, data from commercial providers, data from different jurisdictions about voters, and that data can be combined with, crowdsourced data from Wikipedia or OpenStreetMaps, or commercial data from Bing Maps or Google Maps, labels on lists, and in our case, we're also combining it with data from entities such as Comcast and data and the other cable net providers. So, for instance, what you're seeing here is a New York City area, the cable zones, and a technology that we've developed allows you to overlay all of the cable TV zones and display the number of voters per cable zone instantly. So what you can do is, and this is being used more and more widely by campaigns that do a lot of cable TV advertising, so you can specify a target demographic and then move your mouse. As you move your mouse to a different area, it tells you how many people you will reach within that cable zone. So it tells you basically where to spend your cable TV advertising dollars. My last slide, and I'm zooming in. So one more thing. So redistricting, here, of course, very clear example of redistricting taking place. The biggest problem for us, again, is the fact that this data doesn't come at the same time. Sometimes there are mistakes being made at the county level or at the state level. Creates a huge mess for us. We have to redo everything, and it's millions and millions of records that need to be pushed through each time. A last example, here we're combining registered voter databases with oblique aerial photos. We can do this on mobile devices. We can do this on online environments. And you can literally click on a house and see who lives there. And you get a combination of voter data as well as imagery, in this case from Bing Maps. So a lot of technological developments, but if you ask me, is 2012 the watershed year? I'm saying no. And the reason is I see a lot of new developments, but the developers, like ourselves and all of my colleagues, haven't had the time to integrate all of these components yet. So the underlying technology is developing very rapidly, but it's too new yet to be used yet by developers. And what I see is a lot of fundamental changes will come over the next year as these different developments are hooked up, as APIs are being used, as communication is taking place, as the mobile devices, especially tablets, are becoming more powerful. So a lot more to come. I think that in 2014, data will be ubiquitous, it will be instant, and it will be mobile. So that's my little bit of a technical overview, probably.
Eimar, thank you so much. That was fascinating and possibly just slightly disturbing as well, seeing some of the fine-grained data you're able to collect. I just have a question really about the technical maturity of the campaigns. Obviously, you're a provider of an application. You were talking about APIs and so on. Do you find that many campaigns at the moment have developers on staff that are able to integrate and do things for themselves? Or are they mostly kind of heading to you for kind of these shrink-wrap solutions?
Well, I think, shrink-wrap solutions, of course, are, they're available in a certain way. I think the problem with campaigns is that they're under a lot of pressure. And unfortunately, with software development, if you want to develop certain applications, you really need to start, 6 months, 12 months at least in advance. So, no, I don't see at the real application level a lot of people coming to market. A lot of folks are trying it. They have some people on staff. They're coming up with some applications. They're able to pull some data. But for the really heavy-duty applications, you need a staff of 5 or 10 people and work on it for 2 years.
Right. And of your customers, could you just give us an idea what kind of campaigns are actually using your software?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, of course, is we have no customers that want their name in the newspaper.
Okay, maybe in general.
Their names are appearing in the newspaper all the time, but so people are very secretive about which tools they use. Our tools are being used by senatorial campaigns, by congressional campaigns, and also by local campaigns. It's the whole spectrum, basically. And then certainly, if you look at the TV advertising tools we've built, that's very attractive to the larger campaigns and to super PACs. So, not to use a bad word here, but very big customers this election cycle.
Thank you very much for being with us. We very much appreciated your presentation, Eimar.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Our next presenter is Jeremy Dunck from Votizen, and he's joined by David Benetti. Jeremy.
Hi, this is David Benetti with Votizen, and Jeremy is sitting right here by me. Hi. And so we wanted to talk a little bit, and Jeremy is going to do most of the presentation. Jeremy is one of our lead engineers, and I'm the co-founder. And just a real quick introduction of what Votizen is. I think that putting it back on the side of the voter is very appropriate. And really our mission is to try to use these new developments and this disruption that is social media to provide an opportunity for the voter to have more of the power accrue to themselves and give them the ability to organize their own voting power. And the way we see the world, we really want to make it one where the size of your network matters more than the size of your checkbook. And we all have our networks now, and we have voters that we know and deal with on a daily basis. And so by revealing that and exposing the connections that we already have and the influence that we can have on individual elections, particularly down-ticket local elections where these decisions can really make a large difference in our communities, we believe that we can really change how politics is conducted as we start to see these technologies mature. And I think just as an example, as you may recall from Patrick Ruffini speaking earlier, talking about how Romney had an advantage by being very specific and getting really to the individual level in Iowa and in Michigan. Those are examples of what we see the future is. That social media now provides us the opportunity to take those individual relationships and build those individual relationships, person to person, candidate to voter, have that be the dominant form of political engagement, which is certainly closer to the ideals on which the U.S. Republic was founded and we think is one of the core tenets of representative democracy. So that's what we're trying to accomplish at Votizen, and I'll let Jeremy talk a little bit about some of the technology and big data that we use to help make that happen.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go over the general history. I guess this is a pretty savvy audience, but the campaigns have progressively gotten more and more savvy with controlling the message, figuring out what they can have legitimate claim to, what will sway 51% of the voters, and including some level of targeting through direct mail. And money continues to pour into this system where it's basically arms race for getting enough funding to get enough coverage to get your message out to convince the voters. Excuse me. And so what you get is whoever can figure out the best message in the best succinct way to sway the voter, that's basically the hot button that they're going to press. And Daisy Ad is really the beginning of this epoch where they found the button that you could say this candidate will not lead us to this end. And that was attributed to a very persuasive end, but was it actually true? Was it reasonable? And so you end up with this small amount of voters in the middle that really decide because you have the people on the left and the people on the right, and the people in the middle are being fought over by whatever emotional appeal can be reached. And in 2008, that was decided essentially by 1 million people. So I just wanted to cover as a personal narrative. In 2004, I wasn't particularly for Kerry, but I was against Bush. And I lived in Texas at the time. And that state was just obviously going to go to the Republicans. And I felt like if I was going to do anything meaningful in that vote, I needed to go somewhere where I could sway the voters. And I literally drove 20 hours and spent 16 hours canvassing in Missouri, which was the nearest swing state for me. And that is just obviously a thing that most people are not going to be willing to do. But it turns out actually most people have 400 connections on their social networks and can reach 50 voters. And by doing that, they could have a real outcome in the voters. I probably only reached 15 people on my canvassing and actually changed their minds. And there are people who in the general social system have influence on many more voters than I would, 1,000 and more. Sorry, slide no function, apparently. So I just wanted to point out that Missouri is decided in 2008 by only 5,000 voters. So you can imagine the people that have the influence in their social graph to reach those voters and to sway them, not by the campaign's message, but rather by the things that they know that person cares about, the things that they are intelligent about and active on. And I think that makes a much more intelligible discussion. So our near-term goals with Votizen are to tie the voter roll to a social network and connect the people in their political interests to the people that they are likely to have influence on. And so that means identifying whose friends who are going to have influence on the people. So these connections are stronger for the political influence, or these people are more on the fence of their decision. And basically to guide the people who have an interest in having an influence on the election to use their time and effort effectively in swaying swaying voters for the candidates that they're supporting. And so we're then accumulating scores basically of this person has been able to sway in these elections, these votes, and that power and political influence should accrue to that person who has the influence. So it basically comes to a situation where the value and the reach of that individual becomes a form of political power. We think in the midterm of 2 years or maybe a little bit longer, that we'll be able to start identifying cross-network ties where this person on Twitter is effective on this issue of Facebook. Also recruiting the influence hubs so that these people are more influential than average or influential on this topic or able to reach these people that are otherwise difficult to reach. And what the end game on this is really a form of transparent political machine where it's clear to everybody involved who has the actual influence and who is pulling the strings. And that basically that stands up to scrutiny, and if you don't make a reasonable argument for your case, then at least it's open to discussion and it's not just an issue of money. And in the longer term, we would like to use this political influence to grow viable candidates. That is to say, the people who have influence in a race would also be able to either be candidates themselves or identify people who would be good candidates and guide people to make choices alternative to the marketing-based system of the two parties. And we're hoping to provide a forum for nuanced debate. We really think that as the network matures and as people realize that they do have this influence, that it isn't all broadcast message, that we'll actually have a more robust democracy and republic because of it. Okay. So, sorry, just one more slide. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to call out, in particular, on the issue of freeing the data or open data now. ProPublica is working on opening TV ad spend data. That's that first link, bit.ly free the files. And basically, by law, the public spend of TV has to be available to the public. But in order to get it, you actually have to go into that TV station and get their books. And that's obviously pretty ridiculous with the internet these days. So basically, if you want to get involved with this issue, that's one way that you can do it. Then the second link there is the slide deck, if you're interested. And also the last link is at Votizen, we're hiring engineers and marketing. So if you would like to talk, please talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy and David. I just have, my eyes have been getting wider and wider as you've been talking. I certainly would like to ask you guys a couple of questions. I mean, it seems on the one side this is pretty exciting in terms of using technology to kind of even the playing field, so money isn't the only thing that counts. But on the other side, there would seem to be some sort of interesting issues that we're going to have to come to terms with as a society. You know, in a regular election campaign, you generally understand who the voters are and who the campaigners are. And sort of the end game of what you're proposing is turning the voters into campaigners themselves, but not necessarily with the same burdens of having to declare what their interests are. I mean, how does this pan out in terms of not being kind of sinister?
So most of the relationships that would happen are between friends and people that have a pre-existing relationship, and that certainly is the foundation of our system. It doesn't change that. People don't have to alter any of the existing things that they're doing on their social networks. It's just giving them access to a power that they probably didn't know that they had. And certainly it become jaded against through the sort of onslaught of Super PAC and television ad campaigns. So, again, I think that people that would not be honest and transparent will be punished pretty quickly for that, and that one might accumulate some small-term gain if they try to game the system in that way. But these are pre-existing relationships. Voter relationships are very durable. And so the impetus for one to try to create a durable relationship, particularly if one is looking towards larger campaigns, potentially having a greater influence with more candidates or themselves running for office, then they're quite incented to be genuine and simply support the things that they believe in and want to support and support and carry on behalf of the people that are in their networks. I think that the ability for that system to sort of reinforce that honesty and transparency and positiveness of the nature of the communication is actually quite substantial. And, just as a sort of aside, when you think about how most campaigns operate, they have sort of their air game and their ground game. And their air game is their television and their direct mail and their robocalls and all the things that they do that sort of get the message out. And then their ground game is their precinct walking and phone banking in place where they utilize volunteers for canvassing and direct outreach. And one of those is decidedly negative, and one of them is decidedly positive. And so typically you reserve the negative stuff for the machines and the inanimate objects, the computers and the television commercials. And it's much more difficult, nigh impossible, for people to sort of get their volunteers to go off and have the primary message be pillaring the opposition. Because people just don't do that. I mean, they don't even do that when they're the candidate in a debate. you saw in the presidential debate that candidates suddenly become shrinking violets when sitting across from the person face to face. This also is all about one-to-one. And so we anticipate that not only will it be more transparent, more fundamentally honest, but more positive as well.
That's fascinating. So the one thing, another thing that comes to mind is obviously we're talking about messaging. What we're hearing is possibly mostly kind of one-way messaging. Do you see that your system can be used to, feed the real concerns of citizens back up the chain, kind of run your machine in reverse, as it were, to affect policy?
Yeah, definitely. To me, that is the most important aspect of what we're trying to do is that the campaign doesn't control the message, that controls the vote. And that basically if I have an issue that isn't being addressed, I don't have the ability to get my question asked in the national debate. I can at least discuss with the people who I know and have influence on and have some ability to influence the outcome.
This is really an inversion of the sort of standard system. That's why it's so disruptive. I mean, today the campaigns centralize their message, they repeat it ad infinitum, deviations from the messages are punished, and it's meant to be just sort of one-way asymmetrical. Here's my message, here's my message, here's my message. And this system essentially says, wait a minute, here are our voters, we are coming together, you tell us why you deserve our vote. And if you convince us, then we'll be able to share that with our networks and give you the ability to help earn votes from us. So it really sort of changes the power and enforces dialogue more than monologue. And so when you combine that with the positive nature of it and the ability to then have an impact between elections through these social media channels, as we saw with the SOPA-PIPA debate earlier this year, that gets to be very exciting.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us and being with us this morning. We really appreciated your presentation.
Great. Thanks.
Pleasure.
We're going to move on to our final presenter of the morning now. Clifton van der Linden is a political scientist, and he's the founder of Vote Compass, which is an interactive electoral literacy application that is run during election campaigns. He's going to talk to us about big data and democratic revolution or evolution. Clifton.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I should say, first and foremost, that I'm coming to you from a Canadian experience, so you'll notice that the cases that I use relate to recent Canadian federal and provincial elections. That being said, my organization is working to branch out and to take the technology that we've implemented in Canada internationally. We're already partnering with Australia, for example, to do an Australian iteration of this tool, and we're looking to move or to implement it for the U.S. presidential election and in Europe as well. But forgive me if I draw primarily on Canadian experiences for the purpose of this presentation. So as it was introduced, Vote Compass is an electoral literacy application. Essentially what it does is it compares respondents' opinions and views on specific political issues that are relevant to a given election campaign with the political platforms of the various parties or candidates running for office. What we do, or our procedure, is to partner with a major media organization that has national reach. You'll see from the graphic here that in the Canadian case, for both federal and provincial elections, we partnered with CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It's the largest media organization in Canada. And what we do essentially is they promote the tool, the media organization promotes the tool, and generates significant responses. This has a redundant benefit for the media organization, of course, because they get massive traffic to their site because it's an interesting tool. It has the legitimacy of being built by political scientists. also it generates a lot of data, which I'll speak about shortly. To give you a brief overview about how the tool works, again, users answer a series of questions related to important policy issues. They rank those issues. They assess the leaders and the parties on a number of different criteria. They give us a number of demographic indicators, and then they receive a customized results, which should pop up on your screen in a moment. There we go. So we give them a results. It's a results screen which gives them sort of a sense of where they line up vis-a-vis the various parties running for office or the various candidates running for political office. And furthermore, they can drill down into the substantive content that drives these calculations. They can see how each party or each candidate falls on each issue that's included in the tool. This allows for a more informed electorate, and we think that is as David and Jeremy spoke to, and it's a nice transition, we think a more informed electorate is crucial to a more robust democracy. So the benefits to this tool, and as I pull that up, actually, I will put a link up that has the most recent version of the tool that's publicly available. We have a new tool that's been developed for the Quebec election, but it hasn't been called yet. So this link will take you to the to the most recent tool that we've run, which is the Alberta provincial election. You can get a sense of the look and feel of it. In terms of benefits, first of all, it stimulates democratic participation. It gets people talking about issues that are important in an election campaign and a wide variety of issues, so it doesn't allow any one actor or group of actors to control the discourse around the election. And it also stimulates people who are perhaps not normally interested in politics or who are not normally voters, primarily for the reason that much of the literature will tell us that people who feel they're not knowledgeable about politics are much less likely or inclined to partake in elections. And so the more that we can educate the electorate and make it easy and accessible for them to learn about politics, and fun for that matter, the more likely it is that they'll get out and vote. We promote electoral literacy by ensuring that the calibrations for each of the candidates or parties that we include in the tool are rigorously calculated and justifiable using text from the party platforms directly. The tool increases transparency because you see what party or candidate positions are, and so you can get past the political rhetoric or the spin that tends to dominate election campaigns more and more so as messages become centralized and other voices tend to become diminished throughout the course of an election campaign. It also creates new accountability mechanisms for candidates because we take and include directly in the tool and make available to the public all of the research that this group of political scientists generates in order to calibrate each candidate on each position. So it's a massive database, and it includes all of the candidate statements about a particular policy issue. So it holds them to account in a centralized data set to statements that they've made in the past on specific issues. Importantly, and perhaps underspecified, is that it also generates massive amounts of data, particularly with the model that we've used. And that is partnering with conventional media that have national reach. In the Canadian federal election last year, for example, we generated over 2 million observable respondents, which, given the Canadian population, is a massive amount of data. In fact, the largest public opinion record set on Canadian public opinion in a given election in the country's history. So it's a massive amount of data. And so we had to ask ourselves, well, what can we do with this data, and what are the benefits to the electorate? First of all, it opens up new possibilities for public opinion research. So instead of conventional polling where you take a random sample and maybe have a sample size of 1,000 people and make generalizable representations from that data, we in fact turn that model on its head and we say, let's collect as much data as we possibly can from as many observable data points as we can, and then craft a representative sample from a large, bulk, continuous, self-selected data set. And this can be done using the model that we employ, because as long as we have national representation of all the subsets of different demographic groups, we're able to use multiple regression and post-stratification combined with census weights in order to craft this sort of generalizable sample. Now, the tool is built in a specific way so that we can collect the kind of data we need. You can't just, for example, ask 30 questions and then somehow weight that using census data to get anywhere near a generalizable sample. So that would be misrepresenting what that sample actually says. But we have both implicit and explicit cues in the tool, and we collect demographic information necessary to calculate these what I call approaching representative samples out of these large data sets. So what we can do is we can actually increase the accuracy via conventional samples, that are these small online samples. So as online sampling becomes more and more popular, and because it's cheaper and can be run more often, we have to start to ask ourselves, what can we actually say about the sample that we're generating, and how close is it to a representative approximation of a given population? And also enhance precision. Because we have these massive data sets that we generate from this tool, we're able to subset across multiple variables. So instead of conventional public opinion research that might tell you the difference between, let's say, racial segmentations in a population, we're able to use multiple subsets. So we can say how Hispanic women with a graduate degree feel about a given issue, or a given issue cluster, or a given candidate, or a given party. So the way we're able to subset and drill down into the data is actually quite interesting. This is just a sample data visualization. One thing that we can do is we can drill down to an electoral district, so a riding in a British parliamentary system or a county in the U.S. We're actually able to take small geographic regions and tell a representative story about that region. So we can talk about how the different demographic distributions play out in that region, and also how they play out over time. And I'll give you a URL which you can go to at your leisure, which unfortunately has disappeared. So I'll just give you the results page. If you go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/votecompass, you'll be able to see a time series analysis that we run throughout the 2011 federal election campaign in Canada. And that time series analysis, depending on how well you know Canadian politics, you'll see that it tracks beautifully with the dynamics of that election campaign. So because we're generating bulk continuous data, so big data but continuously over time, what we're able to do as well is we're able to use time series to tell the story of the election minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, and understand dynamics that typical public opinion research is simply not able to get at. And what we do is we give this data to our media partner that we partner with in an election campaign so that they're able to tell the story, and it not only informs the electorate, we can then use this data to provide voice to the electorate so that they can have a say on election issues, not just who wins or loses, but we can tell rich stories about how different groups of people feel about different issues in an election campaign. There's two ways that we do this. And one is what we call the microscope. So we can subset data in a very refined way and look for precision variations in the data across different, for example, demographic groups. And because of the large sample, we're able to do this across a variety of groups without having to predispose the tool to look for a very specific set. So instead of running 50 polls to look at different subsets of data and having to get sample that matches, we're able to run all of those subsets with our massive data set. And the other mode of analysis that we use is what we call the radar. So we can look at the time series data throughout an election campaign, and when we find discontinuities in trends, it suggests that there's some exogenous shock. So we're able to see critical junctures in an election campaign. And just to show you an example of this is, again, from the Canadian election, but there was an event that was rather transformative in the recent Canadian election, and that was the surge of the New Democratic Party, which for the first time became the official opposition party in Canada, and they're a left-wing socialist sort of Labour party. And there was an event that occurred where 4 major polls were released on the same day. It's rather unprecedented, and it showed a significant surge for the NDP. What we noticed from our data, because we're able to look at it over time and really break it down, is we noticed that those polls actually, as you can see in the top left, had a significant effect on voter opinion. They had an affirmation effect whereby voters suddenly, who maybe were predisposed to vote for this party but strategically thought they couldn't win, saw these polls, it affirmed their beliefs, and the theoretical suggestion or implication here is that they decided to vote for this party. So we can see, just based on a time series regression analysis, that this is actually a significant effect that we pick up. Now, the reason that we don't try to call the horse race, or we actually try to use the data to speak about the rich dynamics of the electorate, of any electorate in an election campaign, and again, to give them a voice not just on the outcome of a campaign, but to say that notwithstanding the outcome of a campaign, here are the views of different groups in the population on critical issues that can define policy making for the next 4 years or whatever the term is of a given official. But to empirically test the validity of our algorithms, which we've been working on for years, we do try to show that we are able to at least specify election outcomes. If you look at the top left-hand table here, this is a time series analysis. It's smoothed over time. But this is the recent Alberta election, which was a provincial election that was held a few months ago. The blue line represents the Progressive Conservative Party, and the green line represents the Wild Rose Party. The Wild Rose Party was a new entrant. It was farther right than any other of the parties contending for office in the Alberta election. And all of the polls predicted a Wild Rose victory, that this new party would win. And our data shows that Wild Rose were ahead at the outset of the election, but you clearly see them decline throughout the course of the election campaign, and you see the Progressive Conservatives really rise to victory. And this was the empirical reality that emerged at the end. So again, we're not trying to call election campaigns. We're not trying to posit this tool as a poll. That's not the point. But we can use these empirical outcomes to say, that the algorithm that we're employing and the math that we're doing to get to this result is valid, and we can prove it by testing it empirically in the field, which is what this is for. So that being said, we think that actually these kinds of tools, in addition to their benefits for a more robust democracy, for a more informed electorate, and for stimulating democratic participation, we also think that they can complement conventional pollings, and they can help us make determinations on new approaches to public opinion research. This is still an experimental method. We're the only ones in the world doing it. There are other applications that are similar in mission to ours, especially in Europe, but the tools are not constructed in such a way as to get at this component, and the analytical methods are absent to try and carve representative data out of big continuous data. But as we continue to refine these methods, and as we continue to produce results that match real outcomes, we can show consistently that we're able to provide a deeper and more substantive understanding of the dynamics of any electorate. And finally, and I think most importantly, the purpose of this big data will be not to provide political strategy for political parties, although their strategies may adapt to the kind of results that are produced by these kinds of tools. But most importantly, if the data is taken seriously and if the claims of representative sample are taken seriously, which I believe they should be, then it provides the public with a new voice in election campaigns. So again, regardless of the outcome of a particular election, you can say, this candidate won, but on this particular policy, this candidate is not aligned with the public, and hopefully these candidates will take these results seriously well beyond Election Day and use them to be responsive to the public and to the policy desires of any electorate. So that being said, I appreciate your time, and I would very much appreciate any feedback or ideas you have, especially given the diverse audience that's present at this event.
Clifton, thank you so much. We just have time for a couple of questions that have come up. And obviously, everyone in the chat room while you've been talking is really enjoying what you put together and very impressed. And they're asking the question, in particular posed by Rani from the chat, will Vote Compass be establishing a model for U.S. elections? And if so, will it be for this year?
We are currently working to establish a relationship with a U.S. media partner. We've just started that endeavor, so we're reaching out to either one major media partner or a series of media partners. The important thing for our data is to ensure that we have national reach, and we find that conventional media, I mean, this could go viral, but if it goes viral and it's only in online communities, as much as that becomes a more and more substantive community to engage, and it's one of the mechanisms by which we engage the public, we still find we need conventional media to reach those sectors of the electorate that aren't engaged online. So if we're able to do that, then I think it will be a significant success.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, and we hope to keep hearing from you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all the speakers this morning for their contributions. It's been a fascinating, exciting, and thought-provoking morning. Also, I'd very much like to thank Alistair Kroll, who put the schedule together today, and also Alex Howard, who helped so well at the beginning of this session. I want to point out that our next online event will be on July 24th, and we're actually putting this at a time friendly to the UK and the East Coast of America. So this is going to be called Data in Motion. We're going to be covering topics related to sport and transportation and things of that sort. One of the reasons we're having a conference that early is, of course, because from October the 1st and 2nd, we'll be taking the Strata conference to London. And then on October 23rd to 25th, we'll be in New York. And if you're listening to this webcast, you're able to get 20% off the registrations for those events by using the code OLC20. It just remains for me to thank all of you for joining us this morning for a fabulous online conference, and very much appreciate your contributions and chat as the event has taken place. Thank you for joining us.